Hi, and welcome to Chapter 7. In this chapter, we're going to talk about welfare economics, or basically asking the question, how are people faring? How are people doing? Are they doing well? Is the price and quantities that we found from Chapter 4 in the supply and demand model, are these a good idea? We're going to study how people are doing. That's the origin of welfare. First, we'll look at the well-being of the buyers, the consumers. So we have to think of this thing called willingness to pay, and basically it's the amount that a buyer is going to pay for that good. All right. So imagine there's these four guys right here, and they have willingness to pay for an iPod. They're differing. Not everybody values an iPod the same amount. Okay. If the price of the iPod is $200, who will buy it? Okay. So Anthony and Flea will. Chad and John won't, because Chad and John value the iPod less than $200. Okay, so quantity demanded is 2 and P equals 200. That's an equilibrium. Okay, so here's a simple demand schedule. Nobody buys it if it's over 300. Flea buys it if it's at this price range. If this price range, 2 people buy it. 3 people buy it. And if the price falls even more, then all 4 people buy it. Okay, this is exactly the demand schedule that we learned about in Chapter 4. Let's go ahead and draw this. Nobody buys at 300 and up, so I put this line right here on the axis indicating 0. Okay, and then it steps out. At 300, it goes to 1 person. Okay, and then at 250, the next person jumps in, so there's 2 being bought. If the price drops even more, it steps out to 3 people buying it. Okay, and then finally, if it gets cheap enough, the 4th person will buy it. And then it goes all the way down because there's no more than 4 people in it. So you see, I've traced out this very beginnings of a demand curve. Okay? Now, it looks like a staircase because there's only 4 buyers, so there's 4 steps. But remember, competitive market, we like to think about an infinite number of buyers and sellers. There would be a bunch of little tiny steps, and it would end up looking like a flat curve. Okay, so this is really interesting. The height of the demand curve, so what I'm talking about is that any person, so say person number 2, the height of it from here to here, that's their willingness to pay. So anytime I can look at a demand curve and I can think of these people, 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, the way I think of a demand curve is just we line up all the consumers at the bottom here, okay? And we line them up in order. These guys over on this side want to pay for the good even more. These guys over here don't really care quite so much about it. And then I can look at any person, I just go up to the demand curve, and that tells me how much they're willing to pay for the good. So this is really important because it kind of gives me an idea about how much they really care about that good, because how much they pay is related to how much they care. All right? So you see we have the willingness to pay of these 4 different guys. So consumer surplus now is something I'm going to introduce to you. It's basically a dollar amount of, quote, happiness that the people get. So think about this. If everybody has to pay $260, well, Flea's the only guy who gets a iPod, but he's $40 happy. You see, because he was willing to pay up to he was willing to pay up to $300, but he only had to pay $260 for his iPod. So he's left with this extra $40 of, quote, happiness in his heart. So we want to think of consumer surplus as kind of a dollar value of happiness. All right? So the total consumer surplus in here is $40. And here's how we can demonstrate that. Okay, the difference between the price paid, $260, to his willingness to pay is $40. The total consumer surplus is $40. But what happens if I drop the price to $220? Now we have $80 from Flea because, notice, he has this amount of consumer surplus here. But now look, we have this second person with a consumer surplus as well. Okay? It's smaller, but we have to add it on there. He has $30 of happiness. So the total consumer surplus is $110. So as we see, as we drop the price, the consumer surplus is increasing. The consumer surplus is above price under the demand curve. So let's now suppose that we have a whole lot of demanders. Okay? So in other words, the demand curve is going to look like a lot of little tiny steps all the way down. And really, we're going to go ahead and approximate it with a smooth curve. So let's do that. All right, there's the demand curve. And at 5,000, these are in thousands, remember this is a big number, I want to know how much does guy number 5,000 really want to buy? Or how much does he want to pay? Well, I know guy 5,000 wants to pay $50. But if he only has to pay $30, he's got some $20 of happiness that is still in his heart. So his consumer surplus is $20. All right, so let's think of everybody now. All 15,000 people, they all have some sort of happiness in their heart. These guys over here have a lot of consumer surplus. This guy right here, guy number 15,000, we'll call him the marginal buyer at 15,000. Guy number 15,000 has exactly 0 consumer surplus, right? He cares just as much about it as he's having to pay. So let's use the formula of a triangle, 1/2 base times height. Height is 30, base is 15. 1/2 of that is $225 total. So the area of this triangle here, the area is $225, and it captures the happiness. Now, if I raise the price, the triangle gets smaller, and the consumer surplus decreases for the 2 following reasons. 1, the number of people who can afford it just dropped out. 5,000 people dropped out of the market, so their happiness is no longer being measured, but the people who are left have less happiness because they have to pay more. Okay, so there's 2 reasons. So let's do this answer. Find the marginal buyer's willingness to pay for quantity equals 10 and find the consumer surplus and for price equals 30 and then drop the price to $20. Okay, and then I want you to decompose it into the 2 pieces. So do this on your piece of paper just like I did in the slideshow, and I will give you an answer as soon as you're ready. All right, so guy number 10, number 10,000, is, you just go right up to the demand curve and you see he's willing to pay $30. Okay, so the consumer surplus of everybody at $30 is the area of this triangle is $50. Okay, suppose the price falls to 20. Well, look, we have additional consumer surplus. So these guys right here is the consumer surplus from new buyers. So people from 10,000 all the way to 20,000 were not in the market before, so we have extra happiness from them. But look, these guys from 0 to 10,000, they did have this amount of happiness, but now they have this whole big, huge amount of happiness. So we're going to count the green rectangle as the increase in consumer surplus for these guys who are still staying. Okay? Let's do the same sort of thing for the demand curve. Cost is the value of all of the inputs. Okay? So let's imagine that there's these 3 people and they have this cost. Now, these could very potentially be opportunity costs. Perhaps Chrissy has a very good job which she can make $35 an hour at, and so if she leaves that job, it's going to cost her $35 per hour. All right? So the seller's only going to sell if they can get more than their cost. So let's look at this. If we're only willing to pay 0 to 9, nobody ends up supplying because the lowest guy, Jack, you still have to pay him at least $10. So from 10 to 19, Jack will mow the yards. From 20 to 34, both Jack and Janet. And 35 and up, Jack, Janet, and Chrissy. Okay, so now we have a supply schedule for these 3 individuals. And if we go ahead and graph it, it's going to look something like a supply curve. Okay, but in the same fashion, it's bumpy because we have a very few number of buyers and sellers. Okay, so here's this portion from price 0 to 9, nobody supplies. But then at 10, 1 person jumps out and supplies. And then at 20, now there's 2 people who are supplying it. And at 35, then the 3rd person joins them. All right? So I want you to think about, this is the willingness to sell. At each person, okay, so person number 1, this tells me that Jack is willing to sell as long as it's more than $10. That's his cost. The cost of the 2nd person, I just read it to the height of the supply curve. The cost of the 3rd person, I just read it to the height of the supply curve. Okay? So we have something that looks like this. So now I want you to think about producer surplus. So this is a little easier to think of. This is the price they're getting paid minus their costs. You can kind of think of this like profit, okay? So we know that if we're going to suppose price is equal to 25. First of all, only 2 people are in this market. Chrissy's not even in the market selling because she can't afford. It's too expensive for her. Her costs are higher. Maybe this is an opportunity cost of another job she has. But look, this girl Janet, okay, it costs her $20, but she's getting $25 to mow the yard. So she has $5 of, quote, profit. We're going to call this producer surplus. Jack, he has $15 right here of, quote, profit. We're going to call it producer surplus. So we're going to add these up, both of them, and we will get $20. Okay? Chrissy has $0 because she doesn't even participate. So very simply, producer surplus is above supply, below the price. Okay, so now I've graphed a smooth supply curve because these are thousands and thousands of sellers. And let's imagine the price is 40. So what's the producer surplus? Well, first of all, I want to remind you that at guy number 15, guy number 15,000, the marginal seller, his cost, how much is it? Well, I just look up to the supply curve. That's how I can easily tell his cost. And so I know he's getting 40 bucks. His cost is 30. So his producer surplus is a total of 10. Okay, and if I do this for everybody, I get the area of this triangle, which I can easily calculate with the formula for a triangle. All right, so if the price goes down, you can see this is the new producer surplus. Well, let's decompose. What 2 things happened? Well, first, some people left the market. Everybody from 25 to 15, all of these thousands of people left the market, all of these people here, so they lost this triangle from them. But look, the people who are staying in the market, 15 to 0, you see, they're losing all of this profit or producer surplus because now they're only getting this triangle right here. So this is the loss from the people who stay in the market. All right, let's find the marginal seller's cost at Q equals 10. So the 10 or the 10,000th person, what's their cost? And then the total producer surplus. Okay, and then I want you to decompose it into what pieces are changing in the producer surplus. All right, so this is very simple. Guy number 10 or guy number 10,000, you just go up to the supply curve. His cost is 20. The producer surplus for all of those people is 100. If price rises to 30, well, people are going to get more profit. First, I want to see how much is from the additional people who are in the marketplace. Remember, before, when price was 20, only these people up to 10,000 were in the marketplace. But now when price rose up to 30, we were able to get these extra people from 10 to 15 in the market, and this represents their profit right here. But you can also see that there's some more profit that these guys are going to get, the guys who've always been in the marketplace. Okay? And that's represented by the green rectangle. Okay, so we have a total of 125 extra dollars of producer surplus, and I decompose it into those 2 shapes. All right, so let's think about what this means if we add them all up. So consumer surplus is basically the happiness of consumers. Producer surplus is the profit from sellers. The total surplus is consumer surplus plus producer surplus. That's the total happiness or total monetary value of gains it made in the market. Okay? So in a market economy, means we just let people argue for the price, and the price and the quantity are the P and Q that the demand curve and the supply curve meet at. We want to ask, is this the best that we could do? Okay, so we're going to answer this question using total surplus, and we're going to call that efficient. You remember a couple of chapters ago, I talked about efficiency, and I said if everybody is making as much stuff as they can, another way to think about efficient means that total surplus is maximized. So when you see efficiency, you really should think of total surplus, and you should ask, is it maximized? All right, so is the outcome is efficient if it maximizes the surplus. That means the P and Q we picked is efficient if the total surplus is the biggest. All right? And in order for that to happen, these three things have to be true as well. All right, so let's look at this. So the market equilibrium for a market economy, means that we're just letting supply and demand, people argue it out, and we end up getting P equals 30 and Q equals 15,000. Here's the consumer surplus right there. There's the producer surplus, and the total surplus is the addition of the two. Now the question is the market equilibrium efficient? So first, market equilibrium means 30 and 15. You have to have a P and a Q to have an equilibrium. And the question is there any other combination of P and Q which could make this triangle bigger? Well, from just looking at it, you can kind of see there's no possible way to make it bigger, but we're going to go ahead and talk about it. So you can also see that the people who do get the good, all right, this is guy number 0 to guy number 15,000 or 100 or whatever, or million, whatever it is. These are the guys who care most about it. Because remember, if I just go to guy number 5 or 5,000 and I go up, that's how much he values the good at. That's how much he cares. Okay? If I go over here, this person doesn't care that much about the good. So who's getting the good? It's these guys here. It's these guys who care most about it. All right? So this is a desirable outcome. The people who don't really care that much about it, or who actually would be hurt by being forced to purchase the good, they don't have to buy it either. And which sellers? We want the cheapest sellers. That means the sellers who can produce the good most cheaply to produce it. And these sellers, numbers 15 through 30, they don't. Okay? So we have the most efficient, or the most technologically advanced, or however these guys are selling them cheaply, they're producing the goods. All right? So clearly, it's maximizing their total surplus. Imagine at quantity equals 20, all right? It's costing $35 to make it. That's the red arrow. The green arrow, it's valued at $20, all right? So we shouldn't make that because it's costing more than people value it. So we'll move over, and we'll move all the way back to the equilibrium quantity. The same thing. Imagine that the quantity was 10. Well, the cost is 25, but people value it way more than 25. People value it at 40. So you know what? We should probably make that sale and a whole bunch more sales. That's going to move over until we get to the equilibrium quantity. Okay? So we've therefore just proven that there's no way to make more total surplus than at the intersection of those two curves. All right, so the question basically, or the statement that we're making here, is that the free market all by itself is efficient. It's impossible to change the outcome to achieve a higher surplus. Okay? And there's a French word called laissez-faire that describes that. And there's, I guess, two main competing philosophies. The free market, which means allowing the government to determine price and quantity, versus central planning, which means that there's a central planner who decides how much of a good and to whom that good should be sold. All right? But it's impossible to know that, and centrally planned economies are never very efficient. The USSR used to be a centrally planned economy. China is still a little bit of a centrally planned economy, and there's a lot of problems with efficiency here.